On today's show, who are the most likely Nets to be traded over the next few weeks? What teams could partner with Brooklyn on deals? Who should Sean Marks be holding and keeping? I'll dive into all that with an NBA insider during a trade deadline primer on today's episode of Locked On Nets.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to Locked On Nets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Now the #1 sports podcast network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Erik Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. Thank you for making me your first listen of the day. This show is 100% free on all those great platforms. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Before tip-off, check the FanDuel app and see what's dropping during NBA Happy Hour every Friday from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern. And on today's episode, I got Clutch Points NBA insider Brett Siegel coming on the show for a Nets trade deadline primer. We're going to talk about all the Nets trade candidates, all the smoke surrounding them, who the Nets could partner with on deals, and more. We'll get into all that right now. Let's go. All right, joining the show now, we got Brett Siegel, national NBA insider for Clutch Points. And Brett, we are here today for a Nets trade deadline primer. We're going to talk about everything going into the Nets this trade deadline. There's a lot of smoke surrounding a lot of players. And I wanted to start this off by just outlining who I feel are the most likely Nets to be traded. And then you can tell me if you feel I'm missing anybody, if there's anybody you would add, and then we'll kind of hit those one at a time. But the way that I've been looking at this, there's really been 4 guys who I've been looking at as the most likely to be traded. You know, not saying they're definitely going to be traded, but I think there will be discussion surrounding them. And those 4, I'd say definitely Michael Porter Jr. There's been a ton of smoke surrounding him, obviously. Nick Claxton, I expect to be some interest in him. And then more like situational for where the Nets are at, I think Cam Thomas, and I would also put Haywood Highsmith in there. Maybe Day'Ron Sharpe. I don't really see the Nets moving him, but potentially. Like, is there anybody else that you would add into that conversation that I didn't list there?
I think you hit the nail on the head, Erik. Those are the guys that everybody's kind of talking about, and it starts right at the top of Michael Porter Jr., and I'm sure that's what we're going to dive into right away.
Yeah, MPJ has been kind of like the belle of the ball, it seems like, leading up to the trade deadline. There's been a lot of smoke surrounding him, obviously, career year, in this #1 option role with the Nets. And, with that, it's a player that a lot of people obviously saw as a distressed asset this summer when the Nets acquired him as a salary dump, and he seems like he's rehabilitated his value and more. So, there's been a lot of reports surrounding MPJ. I think the most notable one was John Hollinger from The Athletic, who said that MPJ, a trusted source told him that MPJ is a lock to be traded. I talked about that on a recent pod. I asked around a little bit after that, and I kind of got a different impression. Not that he's not going to be traded, but the way it was described to me was that the Nets are not actively shopping MPJ, but that they've been taking calls on him and that they're more than comfortable holding him through the deadline. And that's kind of a similar message to what we heard about Cam Johnson last year leading up to the trade deadline. And the Nets, obviously, they held him to the offseason. They benefited from it because the Nuggets deal probably wasn't there during the season. But this MPJ situation, I think, does have some differences. But first, what have you been hearing on that front? The Nets are obviously very tight-lipped organization, but there's a lot of talks that seem to be going on around the NBA.
No, you're right. It's kind of, the Nets are saying that they're in no rush to trade Michael Porter Jr. They've more than comfortable holding on to him through the trade deadline if they don't get the offer that they like. And it is similar to Cam Johnson last year because there were some pretty good offers out there for Johnson. They just decided that it was in their best interest not to trade Cam Johnson at the time, and they benefited from it. They got a future first-round pick from the Nuggets, which could wind up being valuable if Nikola Jokic isn't there in 2031 or 2032, whenever that pick is being conveyed to them. But you look at Michael Porter Jr.'s market, the 2 teams that we've reported on at Clutch Points that we know have had talks since the start of the new year, the Milwaukee Bucks and the Golden State Warriors. We know that there's legitimate interest there. And the feeling from those teams and rival organizations is that Michael Porter Jr. will be obtainable before the trade deadline, that he's going to be on the move and that one of those teams will likely end up with him. There's a few other teams that have reached out and have interest. I haven't heard necessarily that they have talked with the Nets since 2026, which is why we're still waiting to see if there is concrete trade interest there and if there is going to be a package from some of these other teams. But the Warriors and Bucks we know are interested, and those are the 2 teams heavily pursuing MPJ right now. But Erik, I will say this. it's not going to be that easy because A, the Nets aren't going to be budging on their price. It's either you could beat our price or we're going to keep him right now. And the second thing is that it will most likely involve at least one other team because you look at the Warriors, they have Jonathan Kuminga as their biggest trade asset right now in terms of the salary and the young player. But if the Nets wanted him, they could have simply offered him something in the offseason. It's very clear that they do not want Jonathan Kuminga. And so he would have to be rerouted to a third team. What could the Nets possibly get from said third team? And the same thing goes for the Bucks, where they got Bobby Portis, Kyle Kuzma. Would the Nets even want either of those guys, or would they go somewhere else? And then the Nets bring back extra assets from a third or fourth team. So that's kind of where things are at right now with Michael Porter Jr. I'm sure that's what those teams are discussing, but we do know that the Warriors and Bucks have had conversations with the Nets to this point.
So you're saying, the thing I kind of want to clarify with you, you're saying that, I've heard that the Nets are comfortable keeping him. They've been giving off that impression, which is logical. Like, we still have 3 weeks until the trade deadline. There's no reason to broadcast that you're definitely moving this guy, for leverage and also in case you don't end up moving him. But you said that other teams are getting the impression that he is going to be on the move. Like, is that just like what you're hearing? They kind of think that this is some posturing from the Nets at the moment?
Yeah, and you know it too. Like, this is what happens 3 weeks before the trade deadline. You say, oh, we're not going to give up our guy. Maybe a team says, you know what, we didn't want to give up an extra pick, but now we're going to do it. And then a deal gets done. And so the next 3 weeks are going to be very telling as to not just what the Nets are thinking, but all these organizations that are in talks with them, potentially for a Michael Porter Jr. trade or a Cam Thomas or Haywood Highsmith, whoever it is. What direction are these organizations going? Are they just kind of talking to talk before the trade deadline and just kind of stirring the pot? Or are they serious about their intentions to either contend or go after a certain type of player? And so it's telling for them before the deadline for the rest of the season, but especially for the offseason for other teams of, hey, that's really when trade talks get done. That's when free agency contracts get done. What are these organizations going to be thinking? And so that's what this trade deadline is really going to set up, especially for Michael Porter Jr., who could wind up being the first big domino to fall after that Trae Young trade.
Yeah, and I'm not that surprised that other teams are under the impression or believe that kind of this is posturing and that the Nets are going to move him, because I compared it to the Cam Johnson situation. At least the messaging that I've heard from some people, sounds similar to what they did with Cam Johnson, as I said, of like, we're comfortable keeping him. We don't have any urgency to move him. But this MPJ situation does have some differences. The first being that MPJ is seemingly the biggest needle mover on the market right now. And I'm not saying Cam Johnson wasn't a needle mover, but I think that it's a kind of a different level where, as I said, like, MPJ kind of seems like the belle of the ball, especially with the New Orleans Pelicans, the reports that they're going to hold on to Trey Murphy. The Nets seem to kind of have the guy right now, which isn't always the case. Another difference is contract length. I mean, Cam Johnson had 2 years left on his contract, where Michael Porter Jr. only has 1. So trading MPJ now, it's a difference between 2 playoff runs with him versus 1 for the acquiring team, which is a big difference. But also, the difference kind of in the other direction of maybe the Nets not trading him is that the Nets are trying to be competitive next season. They owe the unprotected pick swap to the Rockets, whereas last year that obviously wasn't a concern. MPJ is also obviously younger than Cam Johnson. But the impression that I've been getting, or the message that I've been relaying to some Nets fans, is I'm not sure that there's while MPJ can be a part of the future for sure and a bridge guy to their next iteration, I'm not sure there's ever going to be a better opportunity to cash in on him than right now. So if they don't get the offer, they can keep him, sure, but I think there's a decent chance that they're going to get a good offer, because I just don't really see the value getting too much higher than it is right now.
And I'm with you on that. It's similar to the Cam Johnson situation in a way, in terms of how the Nets are holding firm and saying, this is what we want for this type of player. The difference, though, is that Cam Johnson was going to have a market in the offseason. I don't necessarily know if we can say the same about Michael Porter Jr., just because of the needs that the teams that are pursuing him have. And the one big thing that you didn't mention about Michael Porter Jr., why so many teams are interested in him, he's also an NBA champion. He's done that with the Denver Nuggets, and he wasn't the guy on that team. He was their third or fourth scoring option some nights and shooting on the wing. And so he goes to the Brooklyn Nets, proves that he can be a number one without other guys next to him. All of a sudden, if you're the Warriors, maybe Draymond, Jimmy Butler, Steph aren't playing one night, and Michael Porter Jr. is, you still have a chance to win and compete. And so I think that that's a very valuable aspect of getting a guy like Michael Porter Jr., and you can't put a value on championship experience. He's a proven guy in this league. He's won it next to Jokic and Jamal Murray. And so those two teams that are pursuing him, those are two teams that have won a championship over the last 5 seasons, and they're still looking to be in that contending tier. And so that's why there's so much interest in a guy like this. His value's at an all-time high. That's why many teams think that now is the time for the Nets to capitalize on his value.
All right, let's nail down on those teams then, because you said the Milwaukee Bucks and the Golden State Warriors. Those seem like the most serious suitors. Before we get to that, like the Detroit Pistons, another team that I think obviously could be a fit. It doesn't seem like there's been too much linking them to a serious pursuit of MPJ at this point. There were some other teams mentioned, like the Bulls maybe, but like, are there any teams outside of the Bucks and Warriors that you've been hearing about, or are those really like the focuses in terms of the pursuit right now, you think?
There are, but I'm gonna keep two of those teams to myself. I'm not gonna talk about them just yet for pursuing Michael Porter Jr. because there's still time, and we'll see what those organizations think. Right now, it's just kind of a thought, and they've discussed it internally, and maybe we'll have a little bit of something for you guys on Clutch Points next week about that. But as of right now, Michael Porter Jr.'s market, you have those two teams that we mentioned that have firm interest, and then there's just some other teams that have been rumored to be a fit. You mentioned the Detroit Pistons. So absolutely would be a great fit there. But again, that contract size, having to give up a player like Tobias Harris, would the Pistons want to do that? And as of right now, I haven't heard that they want to. I've heard that they like Tobias Harris. He's a great leader in their locker room. And I haven't heard anything that the Pistons are going to make a big substantial move at the deadline. Could that change? Absolutely. And especially because they have Jaden Ivey in the final year of his contract. And I think they have a big decision to make there of whether or not they want Ivy to be a part of their future. So maybe there's something that could happen there with Ivy, and maybe they attach another salary to that to go after somebody like Michael Porter Jr. or somebody else on the market. But that's kind of where the thinking is at right now with the Pistons. I've been told that they don't want to shake up their core too much and that they're moving forward with the young talents. 3 weeks until the deadline. We'll see what happens there. The Chicago Bulls you mentioned, I haven't heard anything there in terms of Michael Porter Jr. being an option. There's been talk about maybe the Los Angeles Clippers could get involved as a team that has expiring salaries, but their lack of draft assets may not be something that the Nets want to get involved in there unless there was another team that was going to give them a first-round pick, but what would they get back? So there's a lot to sort through over the next, 20, 21 days or so, and that's really where we stand right now, Michael Porter Jr. It's those two teams and whether or not one of these other mystery teams that is being speculated in league circles of being interested in Porter, whether or not they get involved based on some other things that are happening around the league, like John Morant and what the Toronto Raptors potentially do with some of their guys.
Yeah, and with the way that MPJ has broken out, with the Nets obviously having an incentive to take a step towards the playoff next season, a debate has broken out amongst the Nets fan base of should the Nets keep MPJ, should they move on from him? My stance has been that, if they can get an offer that they deem to be a good one and like very fair value, if not really good value for MPJ, which would probably mean like a really good draft asset, whether a distant unprotected first round pick, whether, multiple, maybe not as high ceiling first round picks, like 2, we'll see. But the Golden State Warriors, the Milwaukee Bucks are 2 teams that could put together pretty compelling offers for MPJ. So what could that look like? We'll get into all that when we continue Locked On Nets after a quick break. Guys, Fridays already feel different during basketball season, and FanDuel is making them even better. Every Friday night before the games tip off, FanDuel gives fans a new way to kick off the weekend with NBA Happy Hour. NBA Happy Hour is your official pregame, a limited time window where special offers drop right inside the FanDuel app before the action starts. Friday from 6 to 7:30 Eastern, I become appointment viewing with NBA Happy Hour. Opening the FanDuel app during Happy Hour always brings something new. Boosts, bonuses, and surprises. It's easy to check the weekly special before tip-off and make a move before the window closes. The timing is perfect, right before the games and right before the weekend starts. It adds extra energy to Friday night basketball without overthinking it. So before tip-off, check the FanDuel app and see what's dropping during NBA Happy Hour every Friday from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern. A little basketball, a little action, and a whole lot of Friday energy. That's NBA Happy Hour only on FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Guys, the new year is here, and it's the perfect time to reset your routine and refresh your space. If you're spending more time at home, you might as well love how it looks and feels. That's why you should turn to Wayfair. It's a one-stop shop for getting your home back on track. From bedding and mattresses to storage solutions for every room, Wayfair makes it easy to start the year fresh. Wayfair has everything you need for a full home refresh, all in one place. Whether you're updating your living room, organizing your space, or upgrading your work-from-home setup, Wayfair's huge selection makes it easy to find exactly what works for your style and your budget. Guys, I don't do the furniture shopping in my apartment. My girlfriend does that, but she loves Wayfair. She picked up new bedding, new accent pillows, all of that good stuff. It completely changed the room. She can't stop talking about it. She loves that she could find any pieces that match her style without without spending a fortune. Shopping is easy, delivery is smooth, and everything arrives exactly as expected. It honestly makes getting back into the routine this new year feel a lot more manageable. So get organized, refreshed, and back on track this new year for way less. Head to wayfair.com right now to shop all things home. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. Coming back from the break, continuing today's Locked On Nets episode, got Brett Siegel, National NBA Insider for Clutch Points here. We're talking about Michael Porter Jr. We're going to get into some of the Nets' other trade candidates, but last thing on Michael Porter Jr. is just discussing a couple of these possible deals. And the Milwaukee Bucks and the Golden State Warriors are the two teams that seem most realistic. Let's start with Golden State. I feel like the framework has been out there for a while, and it's been, Jonathan Kuminga as the main salary filler. Buddy Hield, Moses Moody, those seem to be like the three guys that would get you there money-wise. JK could be flipped to a third team, the Sacramento Kings. Like that, isn't really that huge of a deal, I don't think, in the deal, at least on the Nets end, but we can talk about that a little bit. But the draft assets, I think, are going to be the biggest thing, obviously, that decide this deal. And for the Nets, I would be interested in getting my hands on a Warriors first-round pick because I think their first-round pick in this year's draft right now is like 16. There's no telling where it's going to go. They obviously have control. I think they can trade 2026, 2028, 2031 or something along those lines. They have 3 tradable first-round picks. So for me, it's probably a question for the Nets. Can they get maybe 2 of those or 1 of those in a swap or 1 distant unprotected pick? Like that's kind of what it seems like. But it seems like the Warriors, they have more than enough ammo. And with the way that Steph Curry's playing, even though they're probably not that close to like beating an Oklahoma City Thunder's team, they probably feel some obligation to go for it somewhat with the way that Steph's playing. Like all-time great. Don't let him ride out and not give it like the full effort.
Well, I can tell you this from the mentality of the Warriors side of things. They are of the mindset that even with this team that they have right now, if you put them in a 7-game series against anybody, that other team's not going to want to see them. And they feel like that they have a chance to beat anybody just because of their championship experience. And we saw that last year. They took the Houston Rockets, who were one of the best teams in the league, to 7 games. They wound up beating them. And then they fell in the next round to the Minnesota Timberwolves because Stephen Curry hurt his hamstring. But if he doesn't hurt his hamstring, do they maybe win that series? And they advance to the Western Conference Finals. And we're viewing this team a lot differently than we do now. So the Warriors, if you get Michael Porter Jr., there's a lot of optimism there. There's a lot of teams and rival scouts around the league who think that Michael Porter Jr. could help take them back to that spot where they were in 2022 and years before that of being a true championship contending team in the West. So what would you potentially give up, though, if you're Mike Dunleavy Jr. and the Warriors? Do you really want to sacrifice the future for Michael Porter Jr., who's going to be on an expiring contract next year? You're probably not going to extend him on a long-term, high-paying contract. It would be like a 1.5-year type rental situation there. And so you'd have to give up Jonathan Kuminga, who is not going to be on their roster after February 5th. I haven't gotten any indications that they are going to keep him. He seems like the most likely trade candidate in the entire league at this point. They're going to try to get whatever they can for him. And so he's going to be out. Moses Moody is a player that they were very hesitant to include in trade dialogue during the offseason, but I've been told that they're more than willing to move him now if they can get a clear upgrade on the wing. He hasn't developed like they had hoped. And then obviously Buddy Hield, a guy that they really love in the locker room. They wanted to get him to Golden State for years. They finally got the opportunity to. So now to get Michael Porter Jr., you'd have to be okay with giving up Buddy Hield. Obviously, that's not going to be the holdup in these talks. It's going to be those draft picks and whether or not the Warriors will budge from just giving up 1 first-round pick. That's what I've been told to this point, is that they don't want to part with more than 1 future pick because of the post-Steph era and the worry about giving up one of those picks that you're going to need down the line. And so the Nets, will they compromise? Will they come down from that 2 first-round pick asking price? Will they say, okay, well, we want a first round and we want a future swap? Is that something that they could potentially agree to before the trade deadline? That's kind of where talks are right now, because if the Warriors want to go out and trade for Michael Porter Jr., the indications, at least that I'm getting outside of the Nets, is that that trade is very obtainable for them to do because of the interest from other teams in Jonathan Kuminga, whether it's the Sacramento Kings. There's been interest from the Washington Wizards. We've heard the Dallas Mavericks. The New Orleans Pelicans are another team that I've heard has interest. So the talk that it's a dead market for Jonathan Kuminga, it's not necessarily 100% factual. There are teams out there that would be willing to take on his contract simply because if things don't work out, they have no long-term obligation to him. He's still young. He has star-like potential. He's shown it. And so that's why there's still teams interested in Kuminga. And that's why a 3-team deal could realistically happen between the Warriors, the Nets, and then another team that wants to take on Kuminga.
Yeah, and the bottom line for the Nets, it seems like it's going to be, like you said, like the draft compensation. Like if they can get, Moses Moody, like nice young player, like there could be some upside. The Nets have obviously had some success. Like he wouldn't necessarily be like a reclamation project, but maybe they can get some out of him. And then the draft picks. And like if I'm the Nets and they're offering, and like Moses Moody is what I'm getting back, and then whatever scraps they can get for Jonathan Kuminga and maybe just their 2026 first round pick, I would consider it. I'm not sure if that's enough for me if I'm the Nets, especially given the fact that I want to, contend or not contend. I want to try to compete next season. And you could extend Michael Porter Jr. If they can get maybe, another first round pick on top of that, if it's maybe protected, or maybe they can get a swap, that's where the conversation I think starts to get interesting. But there is a real, it seems like there's a real dialogue there between the Warriors and the Nets and a real possibility. Last thing, the Milwaukee Bucks I want to talk about quickly before going to some of these other Nets guys. For them, it seems also pretty straightforward. Like Kyle Kuzma, main salary filler. They have their 2031 and 2032 unprotected, or they could trade those picks unprotected. If the Nets could get one of those picks unprotected, that's something that I would be really interested in, probably more so than the Warriors, just because that's post Giannis Antetokounmpo. Like they're probably going to trade Giannis at some point. They'll get a haul for him, but they're in like one of the smallest markets in the NBA. You have no idea how they're going to be able to rebuild that. Like that's a pick that can have some upside. And I've been saying to Nets fans that if you can get that pick and you also have the unprotected Nuggets pick you're trying to trade for a star in the next few years. That's the basis of a pretty good and enticing trade package. So anything you're hearing on the Bucks, like I think that's a team that I would be looking really hard at if I'm the Nets.
You're absolutely right. Where if you get that Bucks pick, you have the Nuggets pick. Those are potentially post Jokic, post Giannis eras, and so there's no telling where those teams are going to be. They could be bottom tier in the NBA. They could be where the Washington Wizards or the Indiana Pacers are right now. Now all of a sudden you look ahead to 2031. If you got two of those picks, and then you have your own pick, then all of a sudden you have enough to package and go get a star. Maybe it's Giannis, maybe it's somebody else. So it's definitely a very intriguing topic to discuss. And the way I look at it too is if the Nets are truly going to be a destination for Giannis, they could do something similar to where they had some picks from the Houston Rockets where they were in the Durant sweepstakes and whatnot, where you potentially move some of those picks back. Maybe you have the Bucks pick and you can give that back to the Bucks to get Giannis. It just something that is in the back of my mind that I can't get away from, because Sean Marks and the Nets are really good when it comes to these draft picks and planning ahead to the future and having it on their whiteboard of what's going to be in the plans for 2028, 2029 and beyond. But you talk about the Bucks, you mentioned it. Kyle Kuzma would be on the move. Bobby Portis would be on the move. And then some other contract, whether it's a Kevin Porter Jr., whether it's a minimum guy, Taurean Prince, who has his injury right now, is on that $3 million contract, but something to get them over the financial burden of taking on Michael Porter Jr.'s salary. And then you look at that third team again, and I just keep going back to the Sacramento Kings. I think that they're going to be the facilitator if there is a Michael Porter Jr. trade to go down, because not only are they interested in Jonathan Kuminga, but they've been linked to Kyle Kuzma through the years. And then if you're going to trade Michael Porter Jr. from the Nets perspective, you want to remain competitive, like you mentioned, Erik. And so what kind of type of talent can you get back? Is it a Malik Monk? Is it a DeMar DeRozan? Is it a Zach LaVine? And that's another interesting topic to dive into of, if you give up Michael Porter Jr., well, maybe you go out and get another dynamic scorer like LaVine, who has the same amount of years left on his contract. He can help bridge that gap and help you be competitive next year. And who knows, maybe you can flip him in the final year of his contract for value. So there's a lot to discuss there. And I think that, again, just comes down to the draft compensation. If the Warriors are willing to give up multiple first-round picks, I think that that's the deal to be had. Otherwise, the Bucks with a 2031 pick, if that's on the table, 2032 pick, then I think that that's something that the Nets will highly consider as well.
All right, let's move on from Michael Porter Jr. Next guy I want to get into is Nick Claxton, because he's obviously the longest tenured player on the Nets. He's had kind of an up and down career, over the last few years, battling some injuries, but he looked really good this season. Early on in the year, he still looked good, as of late, but Day'Ron Sharpe has really been nipping at his heels. And the Nets kind of have these two centers, two guys who look like they could be starting caliber centers, or, Nick is one and Day'Ron potentially could be one. So are they going to move off of one of them? To me, it would make more sense to move off of Nick Claxton, who is older. You could probably get Day'Ron Sharpe at a discounted rate, on a next contract, which, then you could have a cost-controlled center for the next few years. I don't really think it makes too much sense to keep both of them. I did a full episode on that last week, but what are you hearing about Claxton? Anything about the Nets asking price, the likelihood that he could get moved?
Yeah, so I've heard for Claxton that they want an unprotected first round pick. I don't know if they're going to get that, but that is the asking price there, along with some type of young talent. They don't want to take on too much of a financial burden. They want to keep flexibility. They want to continue to develop. And so if they're going to give up a young center like Claxton, who has been the anchor of their defense, and I would like to mention their defense since the start of December has been one of the best in the league. I'm sure that you've talked about it. I'm sure Nets fans know it. And Jordy Fernandez and Sean Marks have to be very pleased with the development that they've seen from their team, especially on that end of the court. And you have to point to Nick Claxton and give him a round of applause for the job that he's been able to do. He's been a catalyst for them on defense. I think that he's been really good on offense as well, fitting in with this young group and gelling with them. And so do you really want to move off of a guy like that, or do you want to kind of see where this goes the rest of the season? And I'm kind of leaning more towards the latter at this point. I think that you could potentially get more value for him in the offseason when teams are going to be more desperate to add front court help. Teams will have more flexibility with draft picks. All of a sudden, you have the 2033 picks that will open up for some teams, and they'll be able to offer up more assets there. So I think that we'll see them make some type of front court decision in the future, in the summer near the NBA draft, whether it's moving off of Day'Ron Sharpe, who has drawn interest. I believe it was Michael Scotto who said that the Boston Celtics were interested in him during the offseason. I've heard similar things as well, and he would fit in really well with what they're trying to do up there in Boston. So maybe that's something they revisit there with Sharpe. Maybe Nick Claxton, he has more suitors in the offseason. They look to move him then, especially with another year off of his contract at that point. But I don't think that they're going to move either of them in season. I think that we're going to see the Michael Porter Jr. thing fall. I think that we'll potentially see Haywood Highsmith be on the move, and I think that's about it for the Brooklyn Nets.
Yeah, I agree with you. I spoke about this on the pod where I kind of did like the Nets dilemma between Nick Claxton and Day'Ron Sharpe. And for Claxton, I think there's a few reasons. Like, as you said, this is something that I don't think like fans, always put into account, is that front offices can't always work on like 4 different trades at the same time. So, like, when a deadline's happening, if Michael Porter Jr. is the focus, they might be putting all of their energy or most of it towards that. And then also for Nick Claxton, he's on a descending contract where he's making less money during the final 2 years of his deal. So I think that it will be a more attractive and a more, movable salary in terms of salary matching and some of that stuff in the offseason. As you said, more teams might have picks. You get closer to the draft. Maybe there's a trade around the draft that can be made. You have more of an extended sample size to kind of evaluate the Nick versus Day'Ron for the rest of this season. So we'll see. I wouldn't say that like it's impossible that he gets moved, but I'd be somewhat surprised if that deal doesn't happen maybe in the offseason or beyond that. But we still got a couple other guys that I want to get into. Cam Thomas, also Haywood Highsmith, both of those guys. I think Cam Thomas in particular obviously has been a big topic of discussion for Nets fans over the last year. So we'll get into those guys, what we think their fates could be when we close out Locked On Nets after a quick break. Guys, it's 2025, almost 2026, and those days of waiting for something to become a full-blown emergency before you see a doctor, they're over. No more walking it off for 6 months. No more pretending that weird shoulder stiffness is just sleeping wrong. It's time to take your health seriously, and ZocDoc makes that easier than ever, because staying healthy is more than hitting the gym or eating right. It's about actually getting things checked out when something feels off. Using ZocDoc makes scheduling easier. Search for in-network doctors and book right in the app. Real appointment times are listed, including same-day visits. No more back-and-forth phone calls or waiting to be seen. It's super helpful for routine checkups and those little issues you've been meaning to get checked out. So stop putting off your doctor's appointments and get the care you need. Go to ZocDoc.com/LockedOnNBA to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/LockedOnNBA. Again, ZocDoc.com/LockedOnNBA. All right, coming back from the break, closing out today's Locked On Nets episode with Clutch Points national NBA insider Brett Siegel. Cam Thomas, Brett, has been a big topic of Nets discussion, especially amongst the fan base for the last 4 years now, it seems like, since he has somewhat been in the rotation, especially these last 3 seasons. And with Cam accepting the qualifying offer, my read on the situation has been, since he signed that QO, that it was going to be the end of his time with the Nets. Then they start the season 0-7. He gets hurt. They completely turn it around, once he goes out of the lineup, and they replace him with Noah Clowney in the starting lineup. And now he's back, but he's coming off the bench. The Nets say he's on a minutes restriction. I believe that, but I don't think they necessarily would, even if he wasn't, would want to break up that starting lineup that has shown a lot of success. And it just doesn't seem like Cam is a long-term piece. I've outlined the reasons for that ad nauseum, but it's also kind of tough because from things I've heard, there really isn't much interest in him around the league on the trade market. So it's like, I think they'll end up trading him. But right now, at this point, like I don't want to say stuck with him, but like for the time being, they have him on the roster and they have to play him. I don't think like they don't have to play him, but I think that they are going to play him. And it kind of just seems like we're running out the clock until the deadline, where maybe like he's included as a salary filler. Maybe they can get some kind of like second round pick for him, but there just doesn't seem to be a lot of interest in him. What have you heard on that front?
It's about the same. Everything that you said is pretty much what I would echo here with Cam Thomas, where there's not really a market for him. Unlike Michael Porter Jr., who is drawing suitors, Nick Claxton has teams that are interested in him and teams calling the Nets to talk about them. Nobody's really called the Nets to talk about Cam Thomas. So will he be kind of like a throw-in in one of these trades? And the extra part of that is if he's going to be a throw-in, he has to approve it because he has that implicit no trade clause from signing the qualifying offer. And so could that make a trade fall apart for a Michael Porter Jr. or a Nick Claxton at the deadline? So that's kind of where I would be a little concerned if I'm the Nets, but you're going to work with his management. You're going to work with Cam and figure out, well, what's the path forward? Do you want to be here? Do you want to be somewhere else? What is the team that you would want to be to? And see if there's a path to get him there. See if you can recuperate any type of value, whether that's second round picks, whether it's guys on a near minimum contract or young talent. So I think that we'll see something with Cam Thomas. Maybe some rumors pop up the week of the trade deadline, but I think that he's also one of those situations where it's contingent on what happens with like an Anthony Davis or a John Morant, because if John Morant gets moved to Memphis, would they want a score first type of guard that's young like Cam Thomas? Would they take a chance on him and maybe look to keep him on a small contract? Maybe there's another team out there where they don't want a Malik Monk on that type of contract where it's long-term and high paying at $18 million, but maybe they want a type of scorer like that. And they look at Cam Thomas as being that type of a six-man type role off the bench. So I think that there will be some suitors for him before the trade deadline. Who they are, I don't know yet. I would venture to say that they'll probably be in the Western Conference just because there's so many teams out there that are vying for playoff spots and view themselves as championship contenders this year. And so adding a young dynamic scorer like that, whether or not you use them or not, it's $5 million on your books and it's an expiring salary. So that may be worth the rental for plenty of teams around the league.
And I'd kind of lump Haywood Highsmith into a similar, situation, just under the sense that he's making the same amount of money. He's on an expiring contract. I wouldn't expect him to really have a market because he hasn't played it all this season. He's coming off a knee injury, but like both of those guys can be like salary fillers in other deals, especially if the Nets are playing facilitator, which is the last thing that I want to close this out on, because the Nets have $15 million in cap space left. It's the most in the league. As you said, like there's a lot of shoes that still need to drop at this trade deadline. You have the John Morant sweepstakes, if you want to call it that. You have the Anthony Davis. You have like all these other guys that could be moved. There's going to be other moves outside of that. In the new CBA, in this apron era where there's a lot of restrictions on teams making moves, you need these facilitators. You need these teams with cap space. And that's why the Nets have positioned themselves with cap space to be able to be that team. So outside of the Michael Porter Jr. sweepstakes, I have a pretty good feeling that the Nets are going to be in a lot of conversations as a facilitator, potentially using the rest of their cap space or a portion of it to get some more assets. Like anything you've heard on that front? I mean, I know there's a lot of talks going on with John Morant with all these other things that could happen.
If there's draft picks in it for him, they'll absolutely listen and help be facilitators. Haywood Highsmith, obviously Cam Thomas, if he could be a throw-in for extra value, and maybe some of these other guys. What does the future of Zaire Williams look like? Could he be a potential guy that they move for extra draft compensation or to bring back a player to either pair with Michael Porter Jr. or to potentially replace him? So there's a lot of moving parts in Brooklyn before the trade deadline. Obviously, the focus is going to be Michael Porter Jr. And like you said, they're not going to be having 5 or 6 different trades going on all at once. It's going to be one player is going to be the focus. And then if other teams approach them as being a facilitator in a trade, they're going to listen and see what kind of value is in it for them. But until they make a firm decision on Michael Porter Jr., I just don't see them making any other decision at this time. It's going to be a firm yes, they're trading Porter, or no, they're not trading Porter, and then they'll make a decision on whether or not they're going to be a facilitator in another deal.
Brett, appreciate taking the time as always. You do a great job on Clutch Points. If you guys don't already, Brett's a must follow. Go check out his work at Clutch Points. Go follow him on Twitter. The handle's right there. But appreciate you taking the time, man. And we're going to have a lot of smoke surrounding the Nets leading up to the trade deadline. So maybe we'll circle back at some point after. We'll have some discussion about the fallout, but appreciate you taking the time. That does it for today's episode of Locked On Nets. If you guys do not already, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Nets on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. If you enjoy the content, take a second right now, smash that like button, leave a comment, leave a 5-star review. Anything you can do to engage is much appreciated. The Nets are back in action tomorrow against the New Orleans Pelicans, so I'll have coverage of all that and more when I'm back tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.